Last week, we went all in on Cloud and Sephiroth and learned a ton about our personal histories with these two characters. But lo and behold, there's a full, honest-to-goodness cast here. And luckily for us, the balance of the participants aren't half bad either. We have a lot to get through, so it's time to dim the lights, pull back the curtain, and let the crew take a bow as we begin episode 123, Final Fantasy VII, Part 5, A Memorable, Enduring Cast.
A battle between good and evil. A bitter war of love and hate. Final Fantasy VII is the biggest-selling game ever on PlayStation. Over 100 hours of the most compelling gameplay. This year's most anticipated release is Final Fantasy VII.
Now, before we start talking about the individual cast members, let's set the table for the nearly 2 hours of character conversations with some general thoughts. Starting us off is cosplayer Diana McQueen, followed by the one and only Games with Coffee, and concluding with the co-host of the Player One podcast and creator of the Generation 16 series of YouTube videos, Greg Sewart. I was going to ask that, what other characters did you identify with when you played it? Even again, obviously Sephiroth, but and Cloud we talked about for what. Are there any other characters that you saw bits of yourself in that you were able to be like, ooh, I understand that character?
I don't know. That is also a very peculiar thing with Seven, because I do that with everything. I mean, okay. I know we do that as human beings. Like, we're like, oh, that's me. You know, even unconsciously, you're like, I feel drawn to that person. We're similar. Right. But I didn't do that for Seven. Like, it feels like this perfect narrative where everyone exists as themselves, and I didn't want to necessarily be in it. I was just so impressed with the skill in which the skill in which it was told, like the craftsmanship of the writing, and also the merging with like technology, it being basically an interactive novel, with fun, a lot of fun battles in it, and yeah, it felt very like separated from me. I just appreciated it so much. It was like a work of art that you can't own. Yeah. And I was just like, wow, that is amazing. I know people are like, oh, Cloud is me. Cloud, And of course, I always thought Aerith was very pretty, but I guess I was more of a Tifa, if you really want to put a fine point on it. Because, I wasn't a kickboxer or anything, but I was really, I was tougher, and I thought of myself as, just physically stronger, and also, very direct and that kind of thing. Yeah. So I did gravitate towards her a lot. And also, I could talk for 3 hours about the relationship between Cloud, Aerith, and Tifa. And that's another thing that also breaks my heart. The fact that, like, these things exist in the story, and you can, like, hold them where they are not at the tragic conclusion yet. And I think that's what people love. They really just want to play in that intermediate. They don't want to think about the sad ending.
Because it is. It kind of is. Did you identify with any characters in Final Fantasy VII as that? And you said you loved Cloud. Cloud was like your first love at first sword.
Basically,
Cloud.
Yes.
Yeah. Was there anyone else that you really connected with?
Really, like as I go through the game. Let's see. I mean, in many ways I connect with every character in that game in some way, shape, or form. Tifa and her nurturing and maternal instinct. Aerith, spunky, fun. Kind of mysterious, like you don't really know what's going on with her, but she's super interesting, and you're like, yeah, I really, really am interested in you. And then there's Barret. He's a big tough guy, but he's also a big softie when it comes to his kid. And Sid is my guy, man. He's possibly one of the reasons why I succeed in engineering, because that guy is a sweary piece of work, and I'm like, I aspire to be him. In fact, I am like him in many ways. And the fact that like I do a lot of cursing, but in my job, we kind of have to do that if you're working construction. It's like
totally
you kind of have to. Like there's
that's
really no
just
choice.
the world. I've my first job was in building materials and used to deliver like material to job sites, and it's just the parlance of the industry.
Yeah,
it really is.
You're not just delivering materials; you're delivering curses of the materials.
Yes, nothing is good. Everything is late, and everyone's tired and cranky. Do you have any characters that you really like latched onto or didn't for whatever reason?
It's funny because I found, the first characters that you actually play, well, I guess not all of them, but so you really Cloud and Barret are your introduction.
Yeah.
And I didn't really like either of them, to be honest. Cloud was very much that like too cool anime hero archetype that I probably did like that a lot more in the 90s, but I don't remember he was so cold and just his dialogue was not amazing. And Barret, I think the thing that got me was they tried so hard to make him seem modern.
Yes.
There was and it was kind of a running joke, like the ebonics and the light cursing and stuff like that. It's like,
yep.
But I did like how he was like the angry, he was like the big teddy bear that we sort of covered it up with all that anger and that gruff exterior, especially when you see him with his daughter for the first time and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So he definitely grew on me. But I think probably Tifa was the one that I liked the most at the start of the game anyway, just because she was well written and a really good bridge between those two characters. And also you could feel her kind of not always able to bridge that gap between them. It almost felt like she was the everyman in the first part of the game, not really Cloud. Most of these games where you have like the mostly silent protagonist, he's the everyman. You're experiencing the world through him, and you still are with Cloud, but I felt like Tifa was way more relatable.
Yeah.
Because she was feeling the things I was feeling about those other two characters most of the time.
It's interesting as I'm having these conversations. For the first 6 Final Fantasy games, people are very quick to say, oh, I identify with Celes, or I identified with this person or that person. With Final Fantasy VII, it's a lot slower. And people still love this game. It's no question they love it. But the identity thing is like, it's different. So, and that's, I think, a piece of this I'm going to explore a bit is like, what made this different? Where we didn't just fall in love with these characters, were we experiencing this story just as a movie, almost outside looking in, or it's just something that comes to mind as I'm having these conversations.
I think you're right. I think that's definitely that's a great way to put it. It has a different feel from the original games, but it's so much more story based too, and it moves. It's funny, after saying it's a slow burn, the first part of that game moves at such a clip.
Oh,
a lot's happening in the first like 3 or 4 hours of that game. A lot is happening. So, I think you're probably right. And I'll be interested when the episode comes out to hear who other people felt they related to more.
Yeah. Because again, it's interesting because when I played it as a late 20-something, I didn't relate to anybody. It was just playing a game, and it was fun, and I enjoyed some of the systems, and the story was neat, and that was the end of it. Like I didn't have that connection. But again, it wasn't my first Final Fantasy either. So it was a lot of people's first one. So I'm curious to hear why people connect with these things.
I think it's fair to say that a lot of these games are aimed at a more mid-teens to early 20s player as well. So I that doesn't surprise me to hear that in your late 20s, when you got a little bit of life experience behind you,
I'm
that you might not necessarily,
I'm paying for an apartment and having relationship issues and such. It's like the trials and tribulations of Cloud, Aerith, and Tifa are not hitting like they probably would have if I was 17 playing it. Yeah.
When they blow up the macro reactor, you were like, man, imagine what that's going to do to all the Midgardians' power bills. Seriously,
through the roof. Utilities are going to go outrageous. Are you kidding me? You guys don't have to pay. Yeah, right.
I thought it was interesting, actually. I will say, though, the other thing that I kind of especially liked about the first part of that game in Midgard with, and I'm totally blanking now, the corporation. What was the corporation called?
Shinra.
With Shinra, that they were really obviously had a lot to say about corporate greed. And I kind of love that they went for it. I kind of love that at one point they literally just decide to kill a bunch of people so they can kill a lot of other people down in the slums, like where they just release a whole plate from Midgard and drop it on people.
Smoosh
and
them. Yeah.
It's like, this is it's so it's shocking when it happens.
Yeah.
But it's also like, this is the end game for the corporate greed. Sure. Yeah, I can see that, especially in this world.
Continuing our setup and introductory conversations is Mike from the Distorted Illuminations YouTube channel, followed by Ian of Nerds of Broadcast, and finally Julian of the Stage Select podcast. Now, did you say you bought a PlayStation just for Final Fantasy VII? Was that one of the main reasons, or were you looking forward to other? That was the main reason. So when you got Final Fantasy VII, this is interesting because this is of its time. Trying to go back to that era. I had never seen anything like Final Fantasy VII on a TV screen, let alone computer screen or any screen really. What about it underwhelmed you? Because especially of that era, that nothing looked like it.
Purely from the visuals, it was great.
Okay, so visuals,
I always loved how it looked, and again, it's got that Final Fantasy music. Even if I'm gonna still say 6 is the better soundtrack. 7 is not slacking. It was such a good soundtrack. But even then, there's something I kind of started to realize, like, in part in terms of the combat, there really isn't much of a difference between your characters outside of their limit breaks.
True. There's some truth to that, yeah.
You can just give someone the exact same materia setup as a different character, and they're going to function the same. I didn't like that.
Interesting, because... but 6 had a similar thing too, where if you just equip everyone with the same espers, they'd all have the same magic and all that. What made 7 eventually? Fair, okay.
And with 6, that really only happens when you understand how that's working, when you understand how the per level bonuses work.
True,
in 7,
that's true.
You just swap the materia over, and you're basically just making that character the other one. Except for the limit breaks. Right.
So because Final Fantasy VII did have a shift from what I would say more of like a job-based system, like 4 and 5, of course. 6 moved away from it, and then 7 completely abandoned that idea. Because you're right, every character plays essentially the same with the exception of those limit breaks. For you, that wasn't... Because I know you like your systems. Like, you like crafting systems, and you like your customization. So was that a part of it?
Yeah, because I like customization, but if you're going to give me all of these different characters that are so unique, I want them to actually feel unique. 6 still managed to hold on to that. It did fall apart a bit at the late game, yes. 7 almost just abandoned the uniqueness of the characters entirely.
Different. That is interesting. Yeah. Which obviously, a big part of Final Fantasy VII and any Final Fantasy really are the characters. Were there any characters that you really connected with that you enjoyed either playing as or experiencing the game through?
My main team was Cloud, Barret, and Tifa. All the way through the game from start to finish.
Really? Oh wow.
Not to say that I didn't like the other characters, but Kate Sith can get in the bin. Not my favourite. Or Katshi, however it's pronounced.
I don't know.
But there were some of the villains as well that I thought were really well written as well. And, they only turn up in a couple of scenes, but you just think, I want to see more of you. So every time the Turks turned up, I was like, who are these guys? They're cool.
Yeah, they are pretty cool. The Turks are pretty neat. Yeah, they're a fun villain. They always felt very, at the time, I wouldn't have known. And again, I didn't play Final Fantasy VII as a kid either. I didn't have a PlayStation. I was Team Nintendo.
Same.
I played Final Fantasy, again, much later, probably, I'll say maybe 8 years ago at this point, maybe longer. Wow. Maybe a bit longer, maybe 10 at this point, but definitely as an adult. And I played the original PlayStation version. That was the only thing available. And those characters always felt very anime to me, which I can imagine in the West would have been a little bit of a surprise. I don't think a lot of that was very prevalent at the time. So I'm curious how those characters really though made an impact for you.
They definitely made an impact over here. I do remember a lot of big adverts for the game, and front covers of magazines with Cloud with the enormous sword, and of course it was really the first Final Fantasy game we ever got over here, so it had to make that big impression, that big impact.
Sure.
A lot of the marketing was just saying, this is the PlayStation's biggest game. It comes on 3 discs. And it's so big it can't be on 1 disc, things like that. And then, of course, there's all of my friends at school repeating that marketing phrase, and then there's me saying, yeah, I've got it on PC. Mine's 4 discs. It's got an install disc as well.
That's so great. I love that. So, before we get into the story, I'd like to focus on character. Obviously, a much trimmer cast than Final Fantasy VI, but still a memorable one, of course. We all, of course, remember Cloud as the main protagonist, but what were the characters that you connected with when you were playing it of its time, and then maybe as you've moved forward as well?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. It's the same as 97 as it is now, which is the game is about 3 characters for me. It is Cloud, Tifa, and Barret. And I didn't really connect with the rest of the cast, and honestly, like, I think that's like when after the dust had settled and I had kind of had time to think about the game, and especially as Final Fantasy VIII came out and it also had a similarly small cast, I realized how disappointed I had been in the cast of Final Fantasy VII, because it was like literally half the size of Final Fantasy VI's cast,
right? And
then personality-wise, because also it's like, well, 2 of them are missable characters, and one of them I did miss my first time through. I didn't find Vincent. I had to like look up a guide later on.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Play through to get him. And so you can miss Vincent and Yuffie, and then you've got my least favorite Cid. You've got Kate Sith, which I know it's Ketchi. I don't care. Like, I just never cared for that character at all. I think he's got great moments, but I never really cared all that much for Red 13 either. So like, and then Aerith, like, she was. I think at the beginning, like I never really, like, don't get me wrong, I was devastated when the thing happened, but as far as a character, it's like right off the bat, like, I liked Tifa as a character more, and I think that the best thing that the remake series has done for me is make Aerith a more interesting and fun character.
Okay.
So yeah, for me, it was very much like that trio, and didn't really jive with the rest of the cast.
If Cloud and Sephiroth are the driving narrative force of Final Fantasy VII, and you could make an argument that's not exactly the case, but they're definitely the 2 largest pillars, our next character may be the beating heart. And while one of the most popular and divisive Final Fantasy VII debates is Aerith versus Tifa, in this round of conversations, the last of the Cetra was easily the most debated. Doesn't hurt she has one of the most iconic and memorable death scenes in video game history. I suppose that helps sear your memory into people's minds. Starting our conversation about Aerith is Matt and Geoff of the Fun and Games podcast, followed by content creator Mekel Kasanova, and then Michael K. Hughes of the Capes and Junk podcast.
like, so just, I guess to rip the Band-Aid off first on the one big moment, and then I'll talk about one of my favorite smaller moments, is like the death of Aerith. I just had never seen anything like that in a video game. Like, the closest thing was when Cloud dies, or not Cloud, when Chrono dies in Chrono Trigger, and you're like, wait, the main character's dead? But what the hell do I do now? And like, but even that, like, that was more impactful when you brought him back. And for me, at least, Marl hugs him. Like, that was impactful and emotional, but nothing compared to this. When that scene happens, when Sephiroth, something that will always remain very strong in my head is Aerith dropping, like the sword going through her and her dropping limp,
slump,
the
like
slump, yeah,
down.
Yeah.
Like I lost it. I was so upset. And I cried through that whole scene. And like, I think it's just there's no dialogue because there's no talking in the FMV scenes. It's all character expression and music. And I mean, we haven't said it already. It's one of the best soundtracks, but Aerith's theme to this day, I've seen the Square Enix orchestra, the Final Fantasy orchestra several times, and every time they play that, there's not a dry eye in the house because I'm a music nerd, and music is so important to moments like that, and this is the perfect score for that moment. And I think it's just beyond comparison. There are moments like it that have come, but I think to me, nothing as impactful as that moment because it's one of the first I've had. There are ones that have made me cry more or hit me harder, but there's something about this first moment that it was just like unlike anything I'd ever seen before.
And what's so funny is the FMV itself, that moment is iconic, as well as it should be. And I think the limitations of the medium at the time preserved it because the temptation to put voiceover in it, to put dialogue in it is strong. And people give into that temptation all the time. But it did play better because of that. It allowed us to feel. It's why fighting Jenova afterwards had no other battle music than Aerith's theme. Yeah. And I think it's important in looking back on it or revisiting it to look at the moments before and after that are honestly what make it such a big moment for me. The fact that beforehand, Sephiroth does kill Aerith, but you almost kill Aerith. You go forward to meet her and you lose control of Cloud. Now, video games have such a wonderful way of playing with control and playing with watching versus playing. And Final Fantasy VII definitely does its fair share of watching. I would call it the movie of games if Metal Gear Solid didn't come out a year later. But it does still have a very cinematic feel. And so there is just as much of a panic and a worry of Cloud walking up to Aerith, pulling out his sword, holding it over his head and suddenly being stopped and not giving into temptation. But you have to hit the action button for each of those motions. You don't move on in the story. Cloud is fighting, and you pull out the sword. You get it in your hands. You pull it over your head, and then everyone stops you. And you get to feel the relief of not going through like, oh my God, am I about to, what the hell? And then that being taken from you. And then after the fact, after you have that moment of watching the FMV, Sephiroth starts to mock you as if you're nothing, as if you are simply a puppet. And the idea of playing with Cloud as a video game character is a puppet that you are controlling, that you have just played with by hitting the action button to do that scene I just talked about. But also having that said to you and really leaning into the powerlessness that you have just experienced on several visceral levels. I don't care if that is a shape-shifting piece of Jenova's tail or actually the guy that we threw into a reactor 5 years ago or what. I'm taking that fucker down.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah, it's one of those moments where it really defines. Again, when I played it, I had already been spoiled on it,
Right.
2 years after, but when the internet hit, it became the worst kept secret in games. However, it's still, I was able to appreciate it. And it's funny, Matt, how you said when you play games, you try to just roll with it, right? You just roll with it. It's very interesting how we all came at Final Fantasy VII in a different way. Because I was in my very early 30s, late 20s, early 30s. I was doing film reviews like crazy. That was like my main side hustle were film reviews. So at that era in my life, I was very critical. Like everything was looked at in a critical eye, and it was sometimes hard to skew that. So I wish I could have seen it in more of an innocent way, quote unquote, where I can just roll with crazy Sephiroth. So I just wanted to touch on that for a second because I found that really interesting how we kind of both arrived at. But that Aerith moment, I mean, the moment when her materia hits, and you don't know it's materia yet, but that materia hits the ground and that music starts, whew, like right to the heart, like right there. I do want to talk a bit about the Aerith situation, about losing Aerith, because obviously that is the big moment of this game, and you can't talk about Final Fantasy VII without talking about that moment. Do you recall what it was like when that first happened, and what your reaction was?
I was like, when it happened, because there was a lot, and I guess at the time I didn't understand the concept of foreshadowing. But there was a lot of things that happened about 20 minutes before that happened. From Cloud losing his mind at the ancient temple and beating her up, to when you got up to there to see her where she was praying and he's about to cut. And I'm like, wait, what? Why am I controlling this? I like, it freaked me out. And yet, when it happened, when they stopped, they're like, Cloud, stop. I was like, okay, cool. And then cut scene, here comes Sephiroth, shank, smile, ha ha, gotcha, shank. And I'm like, what? I remember I was sitting with my brother Devin, and our older brother Nick. We were like, they were just sitting watching. They were just like, WTF?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
And I'm over here. I dropped the control. I was like, "Hey, what? How did that happen?" And then I was like, "Okay, we're just gonna use Phoenix down and bring her back." No, she's gone. Then when Cloud dropped her, I was like, "They killed a main character?"
Yeah.
And like, I was just befuddled because the only other game, the first game to ever do that is a traditional RPG is Phantasy Star 2 with Nay. Nay got killed off. And it was as emotional as it could be on the Sega Genesis. I'll say that. But that hit me hard, but like this was just like, whoa, I went and did like the date with Aerith, and you spend all this time with Aerith. I mean, you could date Barret or Tifa, but I always shipped Aerith with Cloud.
Yeah.
But like, I was like, wait, I just spent all this time grinding this character, learning about her, getting attached to her, loving her personality. You just took her from me? What?
Pardon? Yeah, right?
I was like, wait,
right.
what?
Right.
And I stopped playing the game for like 2 weeks because I was mad.
Yeah.
I'm like, I remember I took it out my PlayStation, put it back in the case, and I went to my mom. I said, hey, return this game, please.
Wow. You were like, just I can't.
I can't. She's like, why? What happened? She's like, I can't return it because you had it for several months. I'm like, they killed, and I started crying. I'm like, they killed Aerith.
Oh no!
She said, "What?" Oh. She said, "What? What? Who? Is it on the news?" No, it's on the game.
Is it on the news? It's so interesting because earlier you were saying how much you put into Aerith. You had maxed her out. That was your ride or die. You went on the trolley ride with her and the fireworks. Like you went on the date. You were in, and then to have her taken away. Yeah, I can imagine that being a couple of weeks. Wow.
I was mad.
That's wild.
I was mad. I didn't let that go. That just and then like that really kicked off my dislike of Cloud. Because like I had a lot of questions about Cloud with the stuff that he would do. I was like, something's wrong with this guy. And I didn't understand schizophrenia or multiple personalities or any mental health at the time. But like, I was like, something's wrong with this guy. And then like following that, you go to the Icicle Inn and you go further and further and further. And then like the stuff at the Northern Crater. And then when he gave the materia to Sephiroth, sorry if I'm spoiling a 20, almost 30-year-old game.
30-year-old game, yeah, something like that. It's fine.
I'm like, I'm done with this guy. I'm so done. I lost my favorite character. He screwed our party. The planet's done. Like, I was just like, I don't even know what to say. And then when you finally get him back, and you know, when you had to go through the part, the whole to restore his memories and all the other stuff, I still didn't like Cloud. I just like, I know he gets his redemption arc, but it's like, you're getting a redemption arc at the cost of my favorite character. F you. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. You know, I just. And it just doesn't help because like Tifa was trying to like be there for him, and I'm like, you're just a side chick. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I just find it so interesting that people had that connection, and because you're right, you can't get her back. And in previous games in Final Fantasy, like, you know, you lose characters like Final Fantasy IV, people falling left and right.
Yeah. At
the end, they all kind of sort of come back. But there's something about the innocence of Aerith and the, I don't say purity, that might not be the best word, but there's something about Aerith that when she gets run through by that sword, it really does hit. Even though she is an active participant in these battles, like she is involved, there's something that really hits hard, and it's a masterfully done scene. I mean, it's masterfully done. I mean, just from a structure standpoint and obviously filmmaking or a cinematography standpoint, just it's beautifully framed and shot and done. And I just can't imagine somebody playing it of its time. Boom, there's that character, and nope, you ain't getting her back, no matter what your friends in the playground say. You can ride that roller coaster for weeks. It ain't happening. You're just like me and General Leo. You're like, that ain't happening.
Mm-mm. Oh man, General Leo.
Yeah, dude. That stings. But General Leo, you only had for, you know, you used him for a few. You were like, oh, this guy's awesome. He has this cool move he uses, but not Aerith. It was a mainstay. And if you were really Team Aerith, that must have been a blow. Somebody who I'm sure was spoiled on the big Aerith reveal, the big Aerith slaying.
Oh, yeah.
Because again, as soon as the internet became a thing, that was the worst kept secret in video games. Mm-hmm. So, what did you take on that moment when it came around?
Like, yeah, you're absolutely right. Everyone knew about it well before. I mean, if you didn't play the game at the time, you knew the spoiler, and I knew when it was. I was completely prepared for it, but when it happens and her theme starts playing, it still choked me up. Like, all these years later, knowing full and well that it was coming, it still hits like a truck.
It really does. And I gotta say, it's masterful how the game does it, where at first the game is trying to make Cloud do it. And you lose control of Cloud. And I remember thinking like, whoa, wait, what's going on? And again, knowing full well, you know, this is 15 years after after it was made, I'm playing it. I know the big surprise, but still, like you said, and then of course Sephiroth comes off after, you know, you're able to stop yourself from doing it, and then Sephiroth does the deed. Yeah, it's striking. It's really effective. Music cue was perfect. It's just that it's lowering her into the water, like, no Phoenix down for you, my lady. Like that is, you were sinking away. It's tough.
Yeah, it's super emotional for again a game with a story that I'm not super into. It still hurts.
No, that's totally fair, for sure. Continuing our Aerith conversation with some truly personal recollections is Games with Coffee, followed by Eddie Varrell of the Boss Rush Network.
Also, as a kid, like, I really could feel for Aerith. I could feel for her plight. I mean, she's the last of her people. It's kind of sad how she's surrounded by so many people, but yet she feels incredibly alone because she doesn't understand anything about her heritage. All she knows is just stories and legends and whatnot. And here she is. She's a living, breathing person of that heritage, right, but she knows nothing of it. And that's that kind of identity loss, that kind of loss of self, it's just really sad. And then during her journey, you go on and you start learning more about the heritage of the Cetra, their role in the beginning when Genova arrived and that sort of thing. And then you kind of get the sense that eventually Aerith kind of knows what her destiny is. So she knows that, okay, I'm going to have to sacrifice myself in order to save the planet, in a sense. And, you don't pick up that like right away, but as you keep playing it over and over again, you kind of realize that, oh shoot, she actually knows what's going to happen to her. And she's just willingly walking towards that. She's like walking towards the executioner's chair, like knowing that her time is very short. So that made her super relatable because she lives as though every day is her last, and in her mind, she knows every day is her last.
Yeah,
in many cases,
because she sees the finish line almost. She understands what's going to happen. It's really touching and really challenging. But I want to actually go back to that Aerith moment because obviously that's the one it's a top 10 moment in games probably. I mean, I'm not good at lists, but that's kind of where I'd probably put it.
Yeah, and it's up there.
Do you remember what it was like experiencing that as a 10-year-old?
Oh my God. Okay. So, I mean, I was actually kind of like roughly 11-ish during this time.
Yep.
Because I didn't get to play any video games during the week. It was just mostly weekends. And the first time I got Final Fantasy VII, it was a rental, and I didn't have a memory card. So, so I would play through the beginning sequence of that game like over and over and over again until I got a memory card. But far flung in the future, about a year or so later, we get to the point in the Forgotten Capital. This was just after Cloud hands over the Black Materia to Sephiroth and attacks Aerith in a fit of uncontrollable rage. They find themselves in the Forgotten Capital, all the way in the northern icicle area continent, and I'm thinking about it again, and I remember I was sitting in the living room with my brother during that time, and we were both going through it, and we were just on pins and needles. We did not know what was going on. We didn't know what was going to happen next. Cloud wakes up in the middle of the night. He's like, I can feel him. Him being Sephiroth, I can feel Sephiroth. His presence is here. I can feel him that he's here. We got to go find him. And then they go into the bowels of the city, which is a complete 180 from what you see up on the surface. Like you see this, like in the surface, it's just like all decayed. It's like an archaeological paradise for most people. Right. Like there's so much to excavate, so much to explore in terms of like the past, in terms of like digging up artifacts and stuff like that. Like that sort of thing. It's a ruin. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. It's a ruin. It's a ruin of a shell of its former self. But underneath it, there's just this ethereal, like there's these ethereal like looking buildings. They're like elegant looking. They're clean. They're like they look like they've been untouched. And Aerith is sitting on a dais that just looks so pristine, almost the divine, divine in a nature. Mm-hmm. And you're going down the steps and you're going down to the platform. Cloud separates himself from the group. He's like, I got this. Jumps over the pillars that are sitting in this in the water over the dais, underneath the dais, sorry. And I mean, I remember I'm like, what is going on? And then you approach Aerith, and then all of a sudden, Cloud just he suffers another one of his seizures, and he walks back, draws his sword, and I'm like, Cloud, what are you doing? No, what are you doing, man? What are you doing?
Yep.
Turns around, walks up to Aerith, and I couldn't do nothing. I'm trying to move him away, but he would not move.
Yep.
As if it's interesting how in that moment you have no control over his actions. Throughout the entire game, during that time, you were mostly in control of Cloud, but in that moment, the game shifts that narrative and says, "No, you're not in control anymore. You're not in control anymore." Like,
nope.
Cloud is under the influence of someone else, and that someone else being Sephiroth, or really Jenova in that case. Another bucket of worms. So he's holding the sword above his head, and he's about to strike, and Tifa's like, "No, God, don't do it!" Or, well, it could be any other party member, but I remember specifically as Tifa, because like she was always in my main party. I love Tifa. And she's like that, and then cuts to the CGI scene when Sephiroth like buries the Masamune right into her stomach, and it's like, there's no way no Phoenix Down in the world is going to save you this time. But I remember that feeling. It's just, I was in shock. I was like, what? I remember I was just gobsmacked. And then I didn't play the game for like almost 2 weeks.
Wow. It hit you that hard?
It hit me that hard that I did not pick it up for like, I'm pretty sure it was more than 2 weeks, because I know like those 2 weeks, it was a cold one. It was a pretty cold fall afternoon then, and I just didn't pick it up again. Wow. Like, the weekend come about, I'm like, I don't want to play Final Fantasy VII. I'm too scarred from that. And then I eventually went back. I mean, I remember I wrote it as 1 week, but I'm like thinking it can't just be 1 week. It had to be more than 1 week. I'm pretty sure it's 2. I'm gonna have to ask my brother. He probably remembers better than I do.
Still a sizable amount of time. you had to put it down. Like, you had to say. You said, like, I can't.
I could not.
I can't go back to that.
Not.
Wow.
I mean, there was a boss that happens right after the death. Like, you're facing off against one of Genova's forms. I just couldn't do anything. I just like put the controller down and just let it wail on me.
Wow.
That was it.
That's and then crazy.
I just had dreams. It was like, what could I have done differently? It's exactly like the quote. If I knew this was coming, I would have done things differently. But what could I have done differently? That's like, would I go through the game again and do things differently? Like, what would I do? But eventually I picked it back up again. I played through that part. I used a water ring that I picked up earlier to basically nullify all of Genova's attacks, so I can actually get through that sequence. It's like, all right, we're good. And then it just goes from bad to worse to really messed up.
Yeah.
And just it just keeps hitting you, and it's funny too. It goes back to life. It's like you have the good parts where, like, you have that dating sequence where you're at the gold saucer, you're on top of the world, you have your friends beside you, you're sitting with the girl of your dreams, and fireworks are going off, and you feel like nothing bad can happen to you. And then you're just on this roller coaster where everything that can happen will happen. That's like it's like the Murphy's Law of roller coasters, just happens right afterwards. And then next thing you know, you lose control of yourself. You find out that you are technically not Cloud Strife, but a puppet built as a Sephiroth clone. And Tifa knew the truth for the entire time, but she couldn't bring herself to tell him like the truth, because it would just break him. Yeah. In many ways, Cloud was not ready to accept the truth, and nothing pretty much hammered that point up and nothing pretty much cemented that point until they were at the Northern Crater. Until that moment where they were in the flashback sequence where Sephiroth comes and says, "Yeah, no, you're not in this picture. You're not in this picture during that sequence. This is actually Zack, and you're nowhere near this. all of your memories, all of the stuff that you say happened 5 years ago, you were never there. And it's like, and it's so messed up. Like having this guy just tell you, it's like, yeah, everything that you're thinking right now it didn't exist. Like, that's scary.
So as you were playing the game, are there any characters that you immediately attached to when you were playing it? Like, were there any characters that you were like, that you had almost identified with in a certain way?
So definitely Aerith, I did. And I identified with her because of her pureness, pureness, I should say, or purity.
Yep. Cool.
Her humbleness and like her being just a genuine nice person that she cared for everybody, and that kind of represents, like, I'm gonna say my motive, but like my morals and stuff. It's like being nice to people, helping them out when I have a chance to help them out, being thankful for the people that you meet and everything. And Ever just had aura to her that just attracted people to her. Like, there was never, in Final Fantasy VII, there was never no one hating on her. Like, she became, really, for a lot of modern characters for gamers, she became an icon across the board. No matter what, no matter where you came from, once you learned about Aerith, she was almost the equivalent to Mario. Like, still to this very day, if you don't think she's iconic, look at all the cosplay that is still going on with her, just with her outfit.
Totally. You know, absolutely. Yep.
From 1997 to I was at PAX East, and I seen about 7 Aeriths still going on.
Wow.
That is almost 2 decades that this game has been out. Actually, about 3 decades, getting close to 3 decades that this game's been out, and she's been that iconic. So definitely Aerith, I felt attached to. I feel like that represents a lot about me.
Well, let's jump into Aerith, because that was definitely going to be on the list of those big moments to talk about. It's impossible to talk about Final Fantasy VII without mentioning that moment. How did that hit you of the day? And I'd love to hear more of your thoughts about it.
My jaw was on the floor. I
can't imagine.
I good googly moogly gas. I'm like, what? And it was such a turn, because Aerith was my healer and everything, and it was just like that closeness that Cloud and Aerith had, that friendship and everything. And it didn't dawn on me that Aerith and Zack had a relationship. Zack had completely lost any wheelbarrow in the story of Final Fantasy VII. Like, I didn't even care about him. I didn't even know that he was going to be a part of the game until his own game came out. Be like, Zack, who is Zack? You know,
right.
He just didn't resonate in the story. But when Sephiroth came down and stabbed her, and you see it go through her, and the material that's in her head falls, and then just seeing Cloud grab her, in her body and stuff, and then just lay her in the water and go down. It was such a pivotal moment in storytelling and narrative. It really was going for an emotional beat that you really didn't catch in games and stuff like that. Even though that sacrifice and death in role-playing games happen here for ages. Phantasy Star 2 on the Sega Master System. Watch I know some people won't play it, but if you play the ending of that game, you will see the sacrifices that was made in that game. So it's not a new concept or thing, but just seeing your well-connected character and everything that you just love, that you kept using, that you was grinding, putting all this time and effort invested in her, all to slip away for part of a story.
Yeah, that's tough. That's
that was a change in video games and storytelling definitely for RPGs. Of course, you see other games do it and take things like that. Gears of War 3, when what's his name sacrifices himself so Marcus and them could continue on with the mission. He got in the event and drove and stuff, and that's after he seen his wife died and he had to kill his wife. So that death scene was so powerful. Like, everybody who's seen it, some people cried, some people was gagged, they could not say nothing. And don't forget, this is an era where you couldn't say anything. The only way that you could talk about it is if someone was at that point in the game. That was it.
Done talking about Aerith? Okay, almost done. Let's join Greg, Sewart, and James and JG of RetroFits as they put a bow on this iconic character.
Sorry, although I will say, and this is just the hardcore Sega fan in me just crossing my arms and going, humph. When Aerith died, I mean, it was a big impact in the story, don't get me wrong, but I was so angry about this is so stupid. This is an early 20-something. This is an early 20-something nerd being way too precious about what he loves. But I was so angry about how everyone was saying how brave that was of them to kill off a beloved character. When I had played Phantasy Star 2, where Nai gets murdered halfway through the game, and she's like, the second she's with you from the start, she's treated like a little sister the whole time. And I was like, actually push the glasses up, but no, it was very effective, obviously.
Yeah, well, I mean, Phantasy Star 4, I mean, right? Was it Alex, I think it is, or she?
Yeah.
Someone goes down. Yeah, it's like, we've been seeing this, us SNES players have been playing, they're knocking off characters left and right, even in other Final Fantasies. Yeah, but it is a big moment. But it's also, when I look at that moment, it is actually exquisitely done. Like it's the way it's done is I really love the way actually where the game removes control from you. So, because if you remember, Cloud is the one who is supposed to give her the final coup de grace, because he's being taken over by the thoughts and memories of Sephiroth or whatever it is, and and the game removes control from you. So now you're like jamming on your D-pad, like, whoa, stop, character. Yeah. And then Sephiroth comes in to do what Sephiroth does to finish the job. Yeah, it's effective, but I could totally see someone being like, everyone's screaming about this moment.
Yeah. But that was just me being, like I said, too precious about the things I loved. Being
That's fair.
A 20-something nerd.
Listen,
early 20-something nerd.
I was feet in the ground. No way am I playing some Sony thing. That's not happening. Final Fantasy VII, of course, filled with huge moments. I mean, that's just, the game is full of them. Obviously, there's one huge moment we'll probably have to do an entire episode on, which is, of course, is the passing, the stabbing of young Aerith, or Aerith, as it was in our day. Do you remember what it was like to experience that for the first time?
Complete and total shock, because you get invested. I never actually got her final limit break because I never knew that you could get it in the first disc. And afterwards I never tried because, again, I knew that she was going to die.
Why bother? Yeah,
exactly. But because they built it up so much, and even right before she dies, Kate Sith does his prediction, and he was saying that Cloud and Aerith or Aerith are perfect for each other, because there was that.
Oh, right, because he does fortune telling.
Yeah,
the little stuffed animal he rides on is like a fortune telling toy.
because they didn't quite know if it was going to be, I guess the writers were flip-flopping if it was going to be Tifa or Aerith or what, and I guess they wanted to throw that tragedy in there.
Sure.
But
yeah, yeah. I feel like a couple of different writers were fighting each other over the romantic subplots, because
probably
there are several choices you make that affect the affection stat that determines who goes on the date, which I always found one, Yuffie's is very funny. One, it's very hard to do correctly. Like, you have to do things really off to get her date, but she's also the only one who like gives Cloud a little kiss. And then it immediately becomes the most cringe moment imaginable, because she like sits down and she's like, "So are you gonna say something?" And he's like, "Whatever." She's like, "Oh my god!" Just it's so weird. It's so awkward. And it's perfect for her being like 16 and like just a confused teenager. But like to get back actually on point, the thing that I remember the most about the sequence, because it is a whole sequence going up to like the end of Aerith, is like you see the signs that like, oh, things are not as they're supposed to be. Like, my perception is altered because you hear the high-pitched whine, the color changes, like everything goes red for a second. And you like walk up to her because you think, okay, well, there's nothing else to interact with. I guess I just have to go and save her, even though something's happening. Yeah. And then Cloud just steps back and he shakes his head a bit and he grabs his sword and then starts raising it over his head. And just as he's about to cleave her in half, your party members like stop you and you're like, oh, whoa, what's happening?
Whoa,
okay,
what's going on?
We have averted her death. We are good. Everything's, you know what? It's all going to be good and fine now. And nope.
Take a breath. Everyone just relax for a second. Oh, wait.
Yep.
There's more.
Wait.
There's more.
For just 3 more payments of $9.99 a month, you can save Aerith.
I remember that beat with the make out. It's like with the remake. I was like, oh, what was it? It was an in-game purchase for saving Aerith, and it had the director just rolling in money.
Yep, that's exactly what it would be. All you'd have to do is sell that, and you could sell it for any amount of money, for anything. Oh, a king's ransom. So
that reminds me. Just before we move on, reminds me of something. So I won't give away the really sad part of this until it's time, the end of it, for the big reveal. So I saw a video, and most people know like the L1, R1, and it's either circle or square that you push. But if you're on certain screens in the game, like, it makes something special happen. I think the most famous example is if you're at the horror hotel in Gold Saucer, it makes a bat like fly at the screen and like makes a little noise. So a lot of work had been done since the game came out to discover every single one of them. And like, all these videos have been made, all this stuff has been submitted to Square and to the creators of the game, and they were all like very impressed, like, yes, whoa, good work, like, you found so many of them. And people started to say like, I don't think there is any more. And the director of the game released a statement saying, no, there's one left. One. And so I'm turning on this video because this guy like says he found it. And what happens is like he's explaining like how the mechanic works and like each screen and what everybody's found previous to that. And then he explains a glitch in the game wherein if you it's a glitch that he tries to explain as how it actually isn't. It was considered a glitch because if you go back to Midgar at the end of the game after Aerith has died, you see her like tending the flowers in the church, right? And there's 2 kids there, but if you walk up to her, like if you make any motion towards her at all, she flashes and disappears. Like it's meant to be like this thing where, oh, she's gone. And she's actually gone.
If you talk to one of the little, I think it was like the little boys, like, where did the flower girl go?
Yeah.
That's weird.
If you go to the church after defeating Emerald Weapon, she does not disappear. She remains solid. There's not even a sound effect. Oh. And in the video, this guy's like, no, that's not a thing. And he hits the buttons and nothing happens. He's like, yeah, I knew nothing would happen. And then he pulls out his controller and puts it in the second controller port. And he's like, they wouldn't. No, they wouldn't. And he hits the buttons and suddenly like the screen starts to go halfway inverted on the colors and it becomes a horror movie.
Oh no.
And here's the best part. Like they start having a conversation where Cloud is like, but I thought you were gone. Oh, you mean you didn't know? This is Hades.
Oh no. That's weird.
And he's like, what? And then it ends. This is the big giveaway. It ends with Aerith's dialogue box coming up and it says, let's roll, homie. And I'm like, oh, this dude pulled... No, when did this video come out? And it says April 1st, 2020. And I'm like,
That's so good.
Video. It was very good, yeah.
Is it still out there? I gotta see this.
That video, it's gotta be.
Yeah, I gotta find it.
It was like finding out by looking at the date that it was an April Fool's prank was harsh because he even goes into a thing afterwards where he's like, now you can have her in your party for the rest of the game, but all the colors on her portrait are inverted for some reason, and also I can't figure out how to make her say any lines without crashing the game.
That's wild.
No, he's a pretty famous. He's a pretty famous guy for coming up with strategies. I even used a few of his materia combinations that he came up with, for how to. There's a really fun one that is basically easy mode for the weapons. Is that you start the battle and then you walk away because it's an infinite loop that wins the battle for you.
That's wild. Before we continue talking about the cast of Final Fantasy VII, it is time to thank my wonderful patrons for their non-stop and gracious patronage. Starting with Philip Becker, Terry Kinnair, Games with Coffee, BT Goebbels, Julian of the Stage Select Podcast, Seth Sergil of the All N Media Network, Tim Knowles, formerly of The Leadist, the Let's Play Princess of Nerds of Broadcast, Greg Sewart, Joey Coro of Perfect Storm Gaming, Lindsay Harney, and the one and only fabulous, spectacular, and amazing Pete Harney. If you would like to join these amazing human beings in their financial support of A Gamer Looks at 40, then mosey on over to patreon.com/A Gamer Looks at 40, check out the tiers, and sign up today. And if not, no worries whatsoever. A rating or review on your pod player of choice is always a great way of supporting the show, and it costs you nothing but your precious, valuable time. Probably shouldn't sell it that way. Let's get back to the episode. And we still have an entire cast to discuss. Now, fair warning for the balance of the episode, if it feels like some of your favorites are underrepresented, remember we've covered a bunch of ground in the generalities, more than I realized as I was editing the episode, and there's always my Discord to share some love about a character who may have been less than thoroughly discussed, so please take to my Discord. It is free to anybody who wants to join. Come on by. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the balance of the Final Fantasy VII cast. One such character is the final point in Final Fantasy VII's love triangle, Tifa Lockhart. Starting us off is Games with Coffee, followed by Eddie, and finishing up with James and JJ. You also mentioned you're a big Tifa fan.
Wow. Oh my god, I love Tifa.
Dude, what about Tifa? What about Tifa?
Why I can see so many just, oh my god, she's beautiful, she's beautiful, she's powerful, she can crush your skull with her thighs. She can crush man's skull like watermelon. No, but even beyond that, she's not without her flaws, of course, but the way that she's just presented, she's very nurturing. She cares about everyone. She's always an optimist. She always tries to look at the bright side of things. And you can't help but be like, man, I really like Tifa for that. Like, she's nice to everybody. Like, there's not... I remember when I was a kid, like, there's not a mean bone in her body. Like... Right. I mean, eventually we're going to talk about the fan fiction, and like the first thing I thought about is like, there's no way I can have my Tifa character ever be like a mean person.
Really, that was a hard line. There's like no.
Yeah, but no, there are moments where she loses control of herself in my fic, and that kind of operates on that duality there.
Sure.
Like, because there are moments where like when Tifa loses it, she just gets really mad. Like during that sequence during the flashback when her father died, she just flies in a rage. Picks up a 7-foot sword without literally no effort. I mean, 7 feet of we're talking about 7 feet of steel. 7 feet, 1 inch blade. That thing probably weighs roughly 60 pounds, if I have my math right or so. She literally one-hands it in a fit of rage and just like charges at Sephiroth. And I'm like, oh snap, don't mess with her.
Oh, that's funny. I love that. Do not make her mad. Whatever you do, she will mess you up. I mean, she's not like at Supek's level of awesomeness like 7, but she's up there, man. She is up there. But I think one of the best parts about Tifa, again, like I said, is her nurturing nature. She cares about everyone. She always checks in. She's like pretty much kind of the sister that Aerith never had, and like that's kind of my headcanon. It's like those two formed a really deep bond during their journey, and like they're basically like almost like sisters to each other. Like, yeah, I know everyone's like, oh, there's this like love triangle competition between the two, but I'm like, I don't see it like that in most cases. It's just that they have this like, I feel like they have this like really great relationship. I mean, I won't know that until I actually play Rebirth, which is next on my list to experience, but that's just kind of my headcanon. What a roller coaster! I mean, it's just a roller coaster.
And the funny thing is, the team who made this, they said that it was between Aerith or Tifa. So at a point in time, they did kill Tifa in the game.
Wow!
And when they I think they decided to do Tifa. I think they tested it. Within the company and wanted to get people's opinions. And I think they said that it just wouldn't work. There's no impact to it, because it's just like, even though that is Cloud's childhood friend, there's no impact of Tifa dying. What purpose does it does it make? You literally just lose another character. So they decided to go with Aerith because there was such more of an impact due to the fact of how the story was written and how Cloud and Aerith was bonding until that moment happens. And
I think Aerith's innocence that you pointed to earlier, I think that lends a lot to that sacrifice as well, because Tifa was always has a bit of a warrior to her. Like she's willing to go on the missions. Like she's So for her, losing Tifa, I don't think would have hit as hard as Aerith, because Aerith is this, I'll say, symbol of purity. That might not be the right saying, but for lack of a better term, she has this innocence to her where she had to go, and that sacrifice makes it very sting a lot harder, because she's not the warrior type. Even though she's in your party, she's your healer, she's fighting. It's a different vibe with her. Plus, you probably spent a lot of time with her. You're leveling her. You're like, hey, you're my healer. What happened? Like, you got to come back.
Right, and she's your second party member from the beginning of the game. So it makes sense to kill her off because of that. You grow with her. I'm not saying that you don't grow with Tifa, but Tifa comes in later on in the game. So you don't really have that much time to really spend and like have a bonding moment with Tifa, because I think she doesn't come into almost the second disc of Final Fantasy VII. I think through the whole first disc, I believe the whole first disc is still just you and Aerith until the second disc happens.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. There's a lot of that connection.
Tifa as well was another great story, just because she's always like trying to, like, she's essentially like his helper through the whole thing. Like, she's the reason that he sort of passes half the time for being for lack of a better word, real. You know, because without her, I feel like most of the party members would have figured it out. I feel like Kate Sith is on the verge of figuring it out before he has his breakdown.
Yeah. That's fair.
Yeah, no, she was absolutely propping him up and just going along with his narrative for most of it, because she knows stuff is wrong. And, well, not to get into it that much, but the remake does a really good job of exemplifying how much she helps and how bad his problems actually are.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. I never thought of Tifa as like a helper character, but definitely a huge support system. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense as I'm kind of thinking through the story of Final Fantasy VII. Next up, Games with Coffee and the Let's Play Princess shares some thoughts about Red 13 and Kate Sith. The fact they are the only two animal characters in our cast is a pure coincidence. I literally just realized. So let's listen in. Were there any other characters that you identified with really deeply when you were a kid, or again, even as you play it now? Obviously, things change.
I mean, yeah, let's see. As a kid, again, I mean, yeah, of course, Cloud, but who else? I'm really trying to stretch back here to the past. I'd say, you know, in many cases, Red 13. I mean, growing up, you know, I didn't really have a very positive view of my parents. I mean, I was 11 years old. My dad was working like a lot of night shifts and stuff like that during that time. So it was kind of hard to identify with him. But you know, seeing Red 13's story through his eyes and kind of realizing that, you know, he does these things for a reason, it kind of gave me a bit of more appreciation for what he did. In many cases, he, like, don't get me wrong, he's not exactly the most perfect person in the world, but I mean, he's still my dad, and he did his best, and you know, I will never forget what he did.
Yeah. What are some of the characters that you connected with or really fell in love with in Final Fantasy VII?
Kate Sith, he's so huggable.
Kate Sith is adorable and awesome, and a cat. I actually, if we didn't name my black cat Poe, Kate Sith would have been another good choice of name for our black Maine Coon. But it's that's cool. Yeah, super huggable and adorable.
Yeah, Kate Sith. I mean, my main party for every iteration through, at least in the original game, was the 3 C's. It was Cloud, Sid, and Kate Sith.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Nowadays, especially with the currently now Rebirth, it was Cloud, Yuffie, and Red 13.
Really? Interesting.
You'll see. You'll see if you ever play Rebirth. Yuffie is broken.
Oh, really? Like, really? Wow.
She has two abilities that she can use that pretty much just go, hey, would you like your basic attack to be any elemental damage you desire? Hey, would you like to make a clone of yourself who does 50% damage?
Whoa.
Yeah, so she just gets, 1.5 damage plus elemental damage, and she just melts things. It's great.
That's crazy. Okay. I didn't realize she was so overpowered in Rebirth.
And not an optional thing. She's in the game.
Okay, so you have to run with her. That's cool.
Yeah, you have to run with her. She will just join your party. She is not some hidden boss fight, go to Wu Tai, do a bunch of stuff there.
Interesting. Any other characters you really kind of connected with? You said Kate Sith because Kate Sith's adorable, and it's just because it's a cat on a giant Moogle. Awesome.
I mean, you have Red 13.
Red 13's cool.
For the same reason. But also cool because he is such a child. He's actually a kid in their race's timeline. Because even in Advent Children, the very first scene of Advent Children is something like 400 to 500 years later, and he's still alive with kids. Which means at this point, he's pretty much a teenager.
Yeah, totally. That's true. That's a really good point. I don't remember a lot of the Red 13 story.
He believed his entire life, or a good amount of it, that his father ran away from the duty of protecting Cosmo Canyon. And then we finally find out, once we beat Genetic and find the quote-unquote statue, that his father was struck by so many of the stone petrifying arrows that the Gi use. And he was there to the very end, and now he stands as this still alive statue protector. And all I can think is the same thing with what everybody thought when Aerith died. Hey, just use a Phoenix Down. It's like, hey, just use a gold needle. Come on, guys.
Yeah, I know. We have tools for these problems. You're so right. We have tools for this.
This isn't a useless item like the tissue and the 1/35th size model of a Shinra soldier. Come on, use this stuff.
Use the tools. We know we have some in the inventory. I've been saving them for hours now, for just this occasion. That's a really good point. I love that. That the story dictates otherwise. Coming up next, Mike from Distorted Illuminations and Games with Coffee discuss Barret, Yuffie, and Sid. Interesting. And did you not find the characters interesting from a story perspective, or was it?
Yeah. It was a mixed bag.
Okay.
Cloud was okay. He's an all right lead. I didn't really connect with him that much. I didn't care too much for Aerith and Tifa either. Okay characters. I really liked Barret.
Okay, so you were a Barret guy. Why? What about Barret really intrigued you?
Two things. One, he actually did fulfill a comedic side role when necessary very well. He was very funny. I also always had a thing for characters that are just that openly passionate about whatever it is they're doing. And he had more passion in those early moments of Final Fantasy VII than anyone else on that cast.
That's a fair point, especially in the early moments. He really believes in the mission.
Yeah.
Where everybody else is kind of this, not everybody else, but especially Cloud, who you're piloting, he's kind of there just for the check.
Now,
that's interesting. Yeah.
The characters I do kind of like him still as they go on, like Red 8, I enjoyed. I could do without Yuffie. I don't hate her, but she didn't really need to be there.
There's a lot of disdain for Yuffie, and I'm not sure why. I don't know. I don't remember even using Yuffie that much. I've only played it through completion once. This was many years ago, so.
People hate her because unless you know how to answer those questions, you're going to constantly get robbed by her.
That's fair.
I will admit, I love the touch of going into your menu, and while you're doing that, she robs you.
Is that an actual thing?
Yes.
Wait, explain this to me. I don't know this one.
Well, because you randomly encounter her, you beat her, then she'll ask you these questions, talk. If you go into your menu, she just steals some of your money and runs off. Just like if you answer any of her questions wrong. She robs you and runs away.
Why don't I remember? I don't think when I played, because she's an optional character. Like, you don't have to run into her. Weird. Okay.
It was.
Why would they do that?
See, I was reminded because something similar happens in Chrono Trigger. It's when you go in that one sewer area. If you run into the garbage or click on something, it alerts the enemies. But there's a save point at the end. But if you step on it, you hear the ding, and the enemies hear that and attack you.
That's funny. That's right.
But of course, with 7 though, you get to the one character I do love. And if you remember anything about our other conversations, it's the old grumpy guys that always get to me. I love Sid.
Sid's great. Sid's really fun in 7. He is a lot of fun in this iteration of the game. What about Sid? Are you a big fan of?
The early days, just, I was a kid. It's just this angry guy yelling and swearing at everybody. I'm like, that's funny.
There is some charm to that for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. And you're still a big Sid fan?
Oh yeah. I love him the older I get. It's just something about, you can feel just how beat down this guy was by life. It goes from... It is a very funny presentation where just yelling and cursing everyone out. But you really kind of start to feel for just how much crap this guy went through that it wasn't his fault. Just kind of let it make him a bit bitter, but you see him start to get over that. He gets through it. He fights through the old bitter angerness of all of his life. I like that.
I think the Final Fantasy 7 version of Sid is so good and fun.
I love that guy.
He's not my favorite. I think my favorite's still 4, but he's still a top tier Sid for sure.
Definitely for sure. And plus, he's got an airship named after him, and it's so cool.
It is very, very cool.
That first FMV sequence when you see the Highwind in Junon. I think it's Junon. Yeah, yep. Junon. Yes, Junon. And you see you're climbing up that support pillar, and you're sitting on top of the airfield, and you just see that beautiful CGI shot of the Highwind just there. It's like, whoa. That is dope.
Yeah, it is really something else when you have that. And finally, finishing out the episode is Diana McQueen, followed by Eddie Varnell, and a truly random final shout out to a character I completely forgot existed by none other than James and JJ of RetroFits.
Oh yeah, I should also say Vincent. When Vincent he's a character you don't have to pick up, but because he was connected to the Sephiroth story, and they tell that story pretty well. Like, he had his own game, and and then they go into the Turks a lot, and so there's so much content there. People just keep rehashing it, but it's so weird, how it's told, and it's all that's why I want a Lucretia novel that shows her, because obviously Hojo is a horrible person, and she was not in her right mind at all. The whole time
they weren't great.
Yeah. People love to demonize her and say "Whoa, she's a terrible mother," and I'm like, I don't know,
yeah, it's hard to say.
But I have to go back and look at everything they've told us and then make another, because I think she was a scientist first, but then if you get bulldozed by a narcissist, you might do anything, especially if you weren't planning on it. And the whole thing with Vincent and her, and I thought Hojo made him. Did they change it? Did Hojo make Vincent? He like shot him and then brought him back to life and made him a vampire, or
something like that. I can't place it at this moment. It's again.
I just saw a video that said Lucretia saved him and did that to him, and I was like, what? Like, I think maybe there was just a shot of her staring at him, and I'm like, because I can't see her doing that. Like, even she didn't. I mean, even if she was experimenting on her own body, with using herself as an experiment, I don't think she would do that to him. But anyway, that's a huge tangent. So
no, that's totally fine.
Yes.
Totally fine.
But yeah, I didn't really identify with anybody.
Okay, that's fair, and I think that does speak to the narrative nature of that game, where it really is this kind of narrative that washes over you. And I think how you said it puts you in a different place. It feels separate from where you are. I think that's a good thing. I think that can be, I think we're all looking for those connections, but I also do think that there are places in games and any artwork really where you can just appreciate it as the work it is without saying, oh, I totally identify with Red 13. I don't identify with Red 13. I can't. I don't know. He's cool.
Yeah.
He's cool. I mean, he's awesome.
He's probably the most well-adjusted character in the whole thing.
Yeah, most likely. Yes. I'm not a Kate Sith on top of a giant Moogle. I don't know. I've never.
What?
I don't.
Is the cat the robot? Is the plushie the robot? I never quite figured this out.
Know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Why is it two pieces? I thought one was Kate and one was Sith for a very long time.
No.
And I was like, why are they together? Like, what is going on?
I just accept Kate Sith as an entity, and I just say, all right, it's fine.
Don't question.
I don't think too much about it, actually.
I was actually very shocked when I found out the secret behind it. I was like, really? Like, okay, that's fantastic.
Bizarre.
But yeah, I just love. It's a story that I can hear over and over again, and I think that's attributing its success. It's how many times they tell the story, they bring it back. It's because people still love it and they want to experience it. So yeah, I think that's how I felt about it.
Yeah, man. So Final Fantasy VII, obviously there's these huge moments in the game. The game is nothing but these huge moments. And actually, it just occurred to me, we were talking about antagonists. Sephiroth, as you go through the game, you learn that he's really just a puppet in all of this. That he's really not the big bad. If you want to put a title on big bad, Hojo is really the big bad in all of this.
Yeah, because him and the woman, one of the other doctors who fell in love with Hojo, was having his baby, and he wanted to put the cells of Genova into their kid, and she didn't want that, but they ended up doing it anyway at some point in time. And so that whole thing, even when you get to the end, Hojo is like, he's really the antagonist of the game, because just all the stuff that he did, even like he took Cloud and Tifa's town, and like, you guys are test subjects.
Basically, yes. Yes. Like,
he moved his whole equipment and stuff in that little house and everything, and it's crazy. Like, when you read the lore about it, you be like, oh my goodness, he did it all. It's not because he's a mad scientist. He did it because of science. He wanted to know. He was so into the research. Like, this was his addiction, and he couldn't help it. He wanted to see what happens and what can he get out of it.
It's classic, like, BioShock science without morality. Mm-hmm. Like, it's a very similar theme. And it's funny because when I remember playing through Final Fantasy VII, a lot of that gets lost in it. I watched for this interview series a chronological, like, story retelling of Final Fantasy VII, like the story of Final Fantasy VII, but chronologically. And when you watch it that way, it's really interesting because it's like, oh, this is actually really cool and good. But that's when you realize, oh no, there's Hojo and Rufus and all these other characters involved. But we always remember Cloud and Sephiroth because that's what I think the marketing pushed them, and they were just so big. But there's so much intertwined in Final Fantasy VII that I think really bears itself out when you watch like a chronological retelling as opposed to the story itself. For me, the biggest thing with Final Fantasy VII is that you have these two huge characters. You have your Cloud and your Sephiroth, and they kind of dominate everything. Mm-hmm. And when I'm like rewatching some of these, I'm watching YouTube videos to refresh myself on the story, and I'm like, wait, there's a guy called Hojo who's like, he's the main bad guy of this whole story. Like he's the main. Yeah. He's no joke. He's like He's like Reanimator. Like he's like no joke. I mean, I forget Rufus was a thing, and Rufus is a serious part of that whole story. But all these other side characters, and that shouldn't be considered side characters, almost got overshadowed by big sword and shiny hair, and it was a weird thing for 7 for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Song was a good one because the first encounter that you have with like the Turks characters is Reno, who's like the cocky like go-getter, sort of like the young feisty one, and then you have Rude, who talks only when absolutely necessary. I understand that, Rude. I get that. I get that a lot. I work in IT. I get that so hard. Yeah. But like, and then you have Song, who's like the commander of the Turks, and every scene of him in the original Final Fantasy VII, like when he appears, it's something about how they work the camera and the way that they animate his movements. You can tell that he is in command of this situation that he is in. The one exception being when he's clearly injured and just sitting at the front of the pyramid, like waiting for you. But that's also by design. So, every other scene is him just walking in and immediately just telling everybody what to do, and then they have to go do it.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
Funny. That's interesting. What's your take on that, JJ? Go, please continue.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, Song is definitely one of my favorite side characters, and I'm glad he got more fleshed out in some of the compilation stuff, too.
Yeah.
What about you, JJ?
For me, just because of just how bombastic he is, I always liked Dio.
Oh,
Dio!
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Because
Dio.
He was just so much fun when he got to the golden saucer.
Yeah, just having like a straight up over muscled pro wrestler be like the guy who's in charge of everything. That was really fun.
Mm-hmm. And
Dio is
he wears a cape and a Speedo. Come on.
I just looked up Dio FF7. Don't look at the fan renders. Just skip by those pages. That's not worthwhile.
Turn your safe search on.
I didn't need that. So cool. Hi, Dio. That's a side of you I never recognized. So clicking off of that link, Dio. Gosh, I haven't thought about Dio. That just about does it for this edition of A Gamer Looks at 40. If there was a character that you felt did not get the love they deserved, then you just do that. You just provide that love. You be the vessel of that appreciation or lack of appreciation by going over to my Discord. There should be a link to it in the show notes of this episode. It's free to join up. Come on by, make yourself known to the community, and I'd love to hear what you have to say about your favorite character. We only have X amount of time and X amount of interviews to go through, so I would love to hear what you have to say about those characters that maybe didn't get as much exposure on this show as you would have liked. As always, many thanks to Pete Harney and Kev for helping me cut up these interviews. This show does not exist without their hard work. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Many thanks to my patrons, as always, and many thanks to you, my fine listeners, for spending your valuable time listening to this podcast. I truly appreciate every download, every click. I don't think I say it enough, and if I do say it too much, it's because I genuinely mean it. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I genuinely appreciate the ride we're going on. This has been episode 123 of A Gamer Looks at 40, and until next time, just be kind to yourselves and each other.